Hey there and welcome back to Rimworld. My name is Pete and today we complete another episode of our Rimworld Extreme Desert Challenge. In the last video we had a lovely surprise as Edmo and Pollyanna began a relationship. Edmo also received 2 bionic arms, we constructed a deep drill, and eventually we had to call the Empire for help as the steakhouse got attacked by 19 scythers. And 2 of our allies are still here, recovering in our hospital, and given a bit of time, they should both make it back to full strength. Now, the scythers unfortunately also destroyed our moisture pump, but we also only have 2 small spots of soft sand left to clear. And what's interesting is that while the moisture pump takes forever to clear out a larger radius, it actually only takes a few seconds to clear out the spot that it's placed on. And as you can see, we can use that to very quickly get rid of the 2 spots here, although I would say that we are treading a fine line between exploit and proper use of an in-game mechanic. At the same time though, given the fact that the moisture pump works so incredibly slow and that at this point in the game time is really the only investment that we have to make, I do think that it is justifiable to use this method. Again, not to clear out massive spaces of soft sand, but perhaps those that have been keeping us from finishing our base exterior wall. Just as we are about to move over to the last small patch, however, we have bigger things to worry about, as our deep drill has attracted some unwanted attention from below, and in just a few seconds we will have to fend off an underground infestation. We do have a few moments to clear out though and get everyone into safety, otherwise we would have likely lost Alistair here, who can instead now join the rest of the colony in defending the base. Popping up from below the ground, we then have a wide array of smaller and larger insects, and unfortunately, during the removal of the power conduits for the moisture pump, I also inadvertently destroyed a piece of the wall here, which now allows our foes easy access. Now, of course, eventually this is where we want them to be, but as you can see, it is now pretty easy for them to attack our turrets, while we attack them from the sides, including the occasional Molotov, which should do a good job causing them to frenzy, because if you're on fire, you may have a hard time staying focused. Now, admittedly, Edmo is taking a few knocks and we didn't really have time to put anyone into armor, although at this point the fight is luckily already over. The flames are quickly extinguished and you can see that we only lost 2 turrets, the remaining downed animals are quickly killed and Edmo also receives some first aid, and so it looks like the first day of this episode will come to a good end after all. While we are then constructing more of our exterior wall, Edmo and one of our allies both make a full recovery, and in the case of the latter, this means that we should shortly receive a nice faction relation bonus. Before that happens though, we can clear out 3 more small patches of soft sand, and just as Pollyanna finishes that task, Jake throws a party. And there is definitely reason to celebrate, as our relation with the Empire rises to a sturdy 95, which means we should have no issues affording another trader, so let's have Steak call one here. After all, there is a second patient also still making a recovery, so I suppose we'll have even more goodwill coming in shortly. For the rest of the evening then, the steakhouse celebrates, and on the next morning it is butchering time. Infestations are always a great source of meat for kibble, the insects here will drop a healthy amount, and we have killed quite a few of them. For the next few hours then, business continues as usual, and in the early afternoon our second patient makes a full recovery, and a few moments later he makes it off the map, and our relationship with the Empire once again improves. A bit of flake production in the evening then, and day number 2 is more or less completed. Before Jake goes to bed, he can quickly switch out the batteries for the deep drill. After a few days of continuous use, the first one is finally depleted, so we can now exchange that for a full one and let it recharge. The following day then begins with a bit of much needed cleanup. The steakhouse is starting to look a little filthy, and of course that will eventually affect everyone's mood. During Steak's throne meditation we then receive an interesting, albeit pretty dangerous quest. as we would have to take on a sizable mech cluster for this one, and with mech clusters being what they are, and this one holding several drop beacons, and with that a whole lot of uncertainty, I don't really think this is a risk worth taking, especially considering that a psychic droner would also be part of the problem, so we might be looking at some serious mood penalties until we have defeated the cluster, and so, while 8 additional points of honor for Stake would be nice, we do not desperately need them and will therefore likely let this opportunity pass us by. While we are on the topic of potential threats to the Steakhouse, however, I think we should start investing into some more advanced defenses, and so we can now have Troy research the autocannon turret. That one is certainly a bit more powerful than the mini turrets that we currently have. It is not entirely cheap though, but I think we are slowly approaching the point where we need to have a few of them, so let's get this project underway. Our exterior wall, meanwhile, slowly but steadily continues to take shape. The entire northern part of the base, however, is still completely open, because that is where I am planning to eventually construct a larger defensive structure, but the plans for that are not entirely finalized just yet. A fairly uneventful day in the desert then comes to an end with the arrival of the Imperial Trade Caravan, and it would surprise me if we couldn't strike some sort of deal here. And indeed, we have quite a few things to sell here, including a few packaged survival meals, as well as Edmo's old hand talent and prosthetic leg, and in exchange we will acquire ourselves a powerful charge rifle, as well as the tech print for skin hardening. When researched, this will unlock 3 bionic implants that can toughen the skin of a colonist, which effectively gives a colonist natural armor underneath the equipment that they're already wearing. Depending on the strength of the implant, this does come with a few minor downsides, but I do believe that we'll find some good use for it. On the following morning then, we have a small group of travelers pass by, and just a few moments later a second one, although unfortunately neither one of them has anything to trade. In the Steakhouse, meanwhile, we have moved our 2 wind turbines down 1 tile, because now our colonists can actually walk along the upper edge of our farm. And since Edmo has been busy at the fabrication bench, we now have more than 16 components, and that finally allows us to construct a flat-screen television. This will add another powerful recreation option to our common room, although only 3 of the 9 chairs at the table can actually use it, as those are the only ones actively facing towards it. Some surprising news then just a few seconds later, as it looks like love won't be a thing for Edmo after all. Yes, after seeing him struggle for so long to finally find happiness, his recently established relationship with Pollyanna already comes to a sudden and unexpected end. And of course, as luck would have it, it was Pollyanna who broke up with him. To make matters even worse, all that directly in front of Red Hawk, who has been chopping stones in the background. So I guess Pollyanna will now have to move back into her old bedroom, and we probably won't need that marriage spot for quite some time either. On the bright side, it is likely a good thing that we didn't already remove Edmo's joy wire, because I can only imagine how he would handle the next few days without it. But life in the Steakhouse has to continue, and that it does. As Steak is finishing the TV, we are putting down some wooden flooring around our hydroponics farm. That way our colonists working there won't have to walk on sand that often, which should hopefully keep our base a little cleaner. And unlike Edmo, Jake is actually in a good mood, so good in fact that he now receives an inspiration. For the next 8 days, he is guaranteed to successfully recruit the next prisoner he chats to, which for a change perhaps makes the next raid something to look forward to. However, with the good comes the bad, as Red Hawk unfortunately suffers food poisoning, and just a few seconds later our cook Troy does as well. So it looks like we should once again pay better attention to the status of our kitchen. The best course of action for now at least is to simply throw everything out. And the action does not stop, as another Imperial trade caravan arrives just a few moments later, and as Steak suffers food poisoning from the meal that he carried in his inventory. However, we are still not done yet, as Steak now also receives the same inspiration that Jake received earlier, which means we are now looking at 2 guaranteed recruitment successes, provided of course that we can obtain the necessary prisoners. In terms of his trading abilities, meanwhile, Steak is severely impaired thanks to his food poisoning, but in the end that doesn't turn out to be that much of a problem, as we end up not buying or selling anything. Finally then, a bit of peace and quiet returns, although it only lasts until the next morning, as the steakhouse is being hit by a heatwave. Considering that we are in the extreme desert, it is actually somewhat surprising how rarely we had to deal with one in the past, but looking through our colonists' equipment here, I would consider ourselves well prepared. Everyone should be able to withstand temperatures in the mid to high 50s, that is degrees Celsius of course, so about 130 for your Fahrenheit folks. Moving on then, we have another food poisoning, this time on Red Hawk, who apparently also carried a meal in her inventory. And depending on how long the heatwave lasts, we might actually be looking at a bit of a food shortage soon, because unlike our colonists, our crops certainly won't like the high temperatures, and they will very likely end up growing a little bit slower. At least for the rest of the day though, the heat does not become too much of a problem. A new batch of meals is also quickly cooked up, and so no one has to go to bed hungry. On the next morning though, we have to start taking some countermeasures, primarily because our cooler can't keep our freezer cold enough, and of course we do not want to risk losing our precious meat supply. Thanks to a steady influx of steel and components, we can easily afford a second one though, and with that the problem should be solved. A wandering iguana can also immediately go in there. And since our meat supply is secured for the time being, let us focus on hay grass next. And speaking of meat supply, this quest right here could take that to a whole new level, as we receive a call for help from someone who is being chased by 80, yes 80 dromedaries. Now, I have a feeling that we might be biting off more than we can chew here, but I think we're going to take this. After all, this quest would give us another colonist, and we haven't had one in quite some time, although it would sure be nice to know what we're getting ourselves into here. But unfortunately, our potential colonist number 8 remains a mystery for the time being. And so we spend a few more hours working around the steakhouse and keeping everyone happy, before we then eventually accept the quest. And our new colonist joins us right away. He is 57 years old and will now receive the name Carl, as always chosen randomly from the list of patrons in the naming rights tier and above, this time representing Patreon supporter Carl Closer. And Carl is certainly an interesting fellow. The best role I can see for him is that of a researcher who occasionally takes care of our animals, and who we might also train up to become a competent melee fighter. And his traits are certainly fitting for that role. Psychically dull doesn't really change much, but it does make him a little less prone to suffer from psychic drones, while Transhumanist basically begs us to install a few bionic upgrades on him, and Masochist only increases his suitability as a frontline fighter who occasionally gets hurt. All of that is in the future though. For now we have to prepare, as it doesn't take long until the absolute horde of dromedaries arrives, and I am very interested to see how this one goes. To perhaps thin out their numbers a bit, we are actually manning our mortars now. Being packed so tightly together, one hit could cause a good number of casualties, although so far we don't have any luck. As a first protection against the heat, Carl has now equipped a suit of marine armor, and a short moment later we unfortunately also have to abandon our siege equipment without landing a single hit. The dromedaries then march into our kill box, but of course that alone is not going to stop them, which is why we are using Alistair and Pollyanna here at the southern exit to kind of shift the animals' attention over there for the moment, as the dromedaries will always go after the nearest visible colonist. And as you can imagine, we can use that to our advantage to move them back and forth, in and back out of the kill box. And if things are getting too dicey, we can also show ourselves at the opposite end of the base, which will increase their traveling distance a bit and also give us enough time to take care of repairs. Ultimately though, their numbers are just too plentiful, and the small corridor that we have to go in and out of the kill box actually works against us here, because even with turrets shooting them in the back, it does take quite some time until all animals have cleared out of the kill box. Not to mention that after a few hours of fighting, we are in fact running out of turret ammunition, And so, in the late evening, we decide to retreat for the time being. Of the 80 dromedaries that arrived, 63 are still alive, although many of them in various stages of injury, and a good number of them will likely not survive the night. Also, since we had more pressing concerns than to construct a bedroom, Carl will take the hospital for now. Eventually, though, we will of course give him a room of his own. More issues on the next morning then, as our animals are slowly starting to have trouble adjusting to the temperatures, and so for the moment we move them all into one room and install another cooler. In the meantime, Pollyanna has made a duster for Carl, so he can now switch into something a little more comfortable. And of course, a cowboy hat follows soon after, and so Carl is now finally sporting proper desert garments. And that brings us back to the dromedaries. A good number of them have actually died during the night, but of course the problem is far from solved. However, with Edmo now jumping into heavy armor and also equipping a thrombohorn, we might be able to do a bit more damage. Now don't worry, the idea here is certainly not to have Edmo defend a choke point against what is still about 40 to 50 man-hunting animals. Instead, the armor is simply used as a precaution, just in case we don't quite manage to retreat fast enough. And this is basically how we will spend the next few hours, taking pot shots at whatever comes close and then retreating back into the safety of our base, and after the door has been repaired, we repeat the entire process. The only one not participating in this exercise is Troy, by the way, for the simple reason that we need to get some research done, and he's pretty useless in the fight anyway. Now, fast forward to the late afternoon, and thanks to the help of some Molotovs, we have once again done a good amount of damage. To prevent any mental breaks, we will once again call for a break now. Again, I think the injuries sustained will decimate the dromedaries further over the next few hours. Carl is then actually also the first colonist I actively caught watching television, so the setup seems to be working. A new beret for Steak then takes care of some tattered apparel, and as you can see, most of the colony is idle at the moment. But given how the day has gone so far, and also considering the overall temperatures, who can honestly blame them? At least the heat situation then actually solves itself in the evening. The heat wave finally comes to an end, and with that we have one problem less on our hands. Somewhat unfortunately then, another small group of travelers chooses this time to pass by, and unsurprisingly they are very quickly getting decimated. Still, on the next morning the dromedary situation looks much more manageable. In total, 23 of them are still alive, and so, after a nice shared breakfast, we are launching another attack. This time we are choosing a different exit because most of the animals are actually hanging around in the vicinity, and apart from a minor bruise on Edmo, things are going very well. I also think that has to do with the fact that far from all of these 23 animals were still in fighting condition, and so we are very quickly down to the last few stragglers, and we actually have to chase them down, which is a time-consuming but at this point thankfully far from dangerous process. Eventually then, as we march onto what looks to be our final victim, we receive some good news, because finally enough time has gone by so that we no longer have to worry about making any changes to that monument west of the base, so we can basically do with it whatever we want from this point onwards. From this point onwards, the dromedary threat should also be considered eliminated. Pretty much every single animal is either dead or in the process of dying, and even though most of the corpses are no longer usable, we are still looking at a healthy influx of meat. And so, as our freezer is filling and the steakhouse is once again a bloodbath, I think we have reached a good point to make the cut for today. Next time I am hoping to start construction of a proper improved kill box, and I would actually like to hear your ideas for that. Kill boxes are one of the very few things in this game that I have not played around with that much, but as you have seen during the last few encounters, what we currently have is probably no longer enough. And while I'm looking forward to your suggestions, I also have something very special in return, or rather, Tony Murchison has. It's safe to say that Tony has taken fan art to a new level with this 3D render of Edmo. And not only that, the entire thing is actually uploaded to Thingiverse. The link is in the description and the comments below. So you can download the 3D files, and if you have access to a 3D printer, then you can have your very own Edmo minifigure. I will definitely get myself one, as this is honestly amazing, and I can hardly wait to see what this community comes up with next. So thank you once again, Tony, for this fantastic contribution. It certainly is one of the more unique ideas, and I am very much looking forward to having my own mini Edmo. And with that, I think we'll wrap things up for today. As always, if you enjoyed the episode, then I would be very happy if you could leave a thumbs up. And if you like what I'm doing and want to support me and my channel further, then you can go ahead and subscribe if you haven't done so already, grab some merch over on shop.petecomplete.com, or check out and maybe even pledge to the Pete Complete Patreon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.